Hello and welcome. Today's interview is with Georgie Oldfield, a UK registered physiotherapist who was inspired by the work of Dr. Sarno, a professor of rehabilitation medicine who in the 70s did some pioneering work on the emotional aspects of chronic pain. Georgie went to set up SERPA in the UK, which delivers recovery programs for chronic pain, and is now available online for patients and for practitioners wanting to learn the SERPA approach. One of the things I'll take from my discussion with Georgie is the pause, breathe, feel, reassure process for helping people to reconnect with their bodies once they have become distressed. I hope you enjoy this interview. Prior to seeing Dr. Sarno, or was it a training course you went on of his, or what was
He didn't. There was no training worldwide, so that was the main reason I set up SERPA. There was no training, so my training came from reading, researching, traveling over to the States about 4 times to shadow Dr. Sarno, attend the lectures he did, read everything that he'd done about this, attended conferences again with the other leaders in this field, or who became leaders in this field, and so shadowed and stayed with Howard Schubiner, Dr. Howard Schubiner, just got to know people, and it's a very close global community, and so I learned everything as I was going along, because there was no training, and that's why then I decided to make it easier for other people and less costly as well.
Great. So that's a real gap you noticed in so it's in the alternative therapy world, it's often talked about how emotions can poorly expressed or poorly understood emotions can lead to physical pain, but you saw a gap in some sort of training that helps people really get to grips with that and apply it to a practice.
Yes, and I think although there's an awareness, people aren't sure what to do about it. In that alternative, I came to the work that I'm doing from being a physio to actually becoming interested in pain, and then going into the using complementary therapies like reflex therapy was the first thing I got into, and then adaptive reflex therapy for spinal pain, and then a form of Bowen therapy, acupuncture. So these were all areas I was working in, but still very much using a physical approach, even if I was beginning to realize that emotions played a part. So I still didn't know that many alternative therapists who were aware of what they could do, even if emotions were responsible, apart from using a physical approach. And I love this, the feeling that this is more about self-empowerment. It's about education, self-empowerment, and people can do this sometimes with support and guidance, but rather than needing to keep going to a therapist for treatment. So that's, I think, what spurred me on. And there was no treatment, no training of this kind anywhere that I could see. So that's why I then ended up setting up SERPA.
And what you're saying is you want to empower the client. You don't want them to feel like the therapist has fixed them. It's always their body that does the healing.
Absolutely. So my role now has moved to being more initially. I do a 3-month program, because by the time I see people, generally they've had quite a bit of trauma, or they've got that sort of personality that creates a lot of self-induced stress, or just the fact that they've been in that situation for so long, and they're all habitual behaviors, whether it's the personalities, the behaviors, the neural pathways, the pain pathways, they're all habits, and it can take time to actually unravel all that. And I see my role more initially as a mentor, and then morphing towards being a coach, because although initially I'm encouraging them and teaching them what they might benefit from, later on it's more about, okay, this is what happened, maybe you had a challenge, what could you do, what do you think you could have done? And then rather than me advising them what they can and teaching them things, towards the end it's right, what would you have done differently this time? What can you learn from this? How can you move forward from this? So it's very much about them letting them go and understanding it themselves.
So giving them time to kind of figure it out themselves, rather than just giving them answers, which it's they're coming up with the solutions. Okay.
Yeah, and often those are when they're getting the aha moments, and often the times they think are the most challenging times for them, setbacks that they've had. I don't like the word relapse, but that's what most would say. Those can be really good learning opportunities. It's hard when they're in that situation, but when they explore it and they can see how their habitual patterns of going back into that worry or ruminating or whatever, and fear about the symptom that might be triggered, when they go down that route and things just get worse and worse, and they think, then they start worrying they're never going to get better again. Once they look at that, they can see the pathway and what actually happened, then they can learn from that. And that obviously often can be a really big stepping progression.
So, a relapse. So this is clients who are already, they've already familiar with the concepts that you promote in SERPA, and they've made a few steps of progress, but then something, another obstacle comes up, or it feels triggered, or it feels like a setback. So rather than them plunging back down to where they were before, you've given them some tools and resources, and maybe some further support and hand holding, and then they can,
often
move.
At that point they already know it, but when they're in that mindset that they used to be with all that pain, they can't grasp it. They can't find the way back. And an example of this was a guy I worked with who'd had 7 years of severe debilitating back pain, anxiety, and severe anxiety and depression, actually, many years ago. And he was making good progress, and he got back on his bike and he was cycling with his friends. And then one day I had an email in the evening, and by the time I saw my emails in the morning, I'd had 6 emails from him, and they were getting more and more desperate. He said, "That's it, and then that's it. This is not for me. I can't do this. I'm in so much pain." And he was clearly very anxious and very upset. And I contacted him and said, "Have you got half an hour? Let's have a quick call." He didn't look at me once in that call. He just the whole time, and you realise how important eye contact is and connection, because it was really challenging. But I talked him through it, and what had happened was he'd gone on this bike ride, and they pulled in and had a coffee in this cafe. And the last time he'd been at that cafe, he'd had a panic attack. So that obviously triggered something within him that then he wasn't aware of at the time. He was just, okay, everything's fine, having a good time here. Got back on his bike, and he's began with some back pain because he hadn't acknowledged the emotional side of things. And then he focused on the back pain. I knew I shouldn't have gone this back ride, and the fear, and that just perpetuated everything. But when he was able to see what had happened and what he could have done, so I'm not teaching him anything new. I was reminding him of stuff we'd gone through that he'd forgotten when he got went back down into that spiral of despair. And the next week I said to him, "How do you feel about last week now?" And he actually said, "That's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I am so glad that it happened, because I'm never going there again." And he didn't. And he was significantly better because he had actually dealt with things. So that's lovely when you see that.
It is lovely when when there's that, it sounds like another aha moment. He said, "I'm never going back there again." So then there's a kind of sense that he is in control to a certain extent. He can decide what happens to his body and pain. Was he able to identify the trigger in the cafe? Was he able to see what it was? That was it just being somewhere that afterwards he was able to see it was because of a previous panic attack that brought up the tension in his body?
So he, not at the time, but when we talked it through, he realized that the fact that the memory, that cue of going to that cafe, triggered that memory of the panic attack and the sheer terror that he went through then. But then he didn't acknowledge the emotions at that time and just sort of shoved it down and carried on. And that's why then that triggered the back pain that he always used to get anyway. And then that started all those fears about, oh gosh, I've gone cycling, I've damaged my back again, and I'm going to be back to square one. And that just meant that he spiraled downwards.
So that's a great example. As you were describing that, I was thinking about the blog you shared with me about alexithymia, and you mentioned interoception a lot in there. So if how do you use body awareness and interoception? You call it often use the term felt sense with your clients, but in that sort of setting where someone may be they've encountered a situation which triggers them a previous panic attack or whatever it was, how do you use the felt sense then to help them soothe and to work through it rather than spiraling down? What's the role of body awareness in helping people work through triggers?
Well, initially, I will teach them an emotional awareness exercise, for example, like the one in the recording. I will always encourage them. I talk about pause, breathe, feel, and reassure. So the pause is literally as soon as you're aware that you've been triggered, and it might be the button's being pressed, it might be the pain's increased. I would say that the pain will not increase without an emotion. Even if it's a conditioned response, like every time you bend over, you have pain, that's because there's fear there. There's the primal brain protecting you from doing something that it perceives to be very dangerous. And so that I go over and over and over with people with this about as soon as you're aware, just pause, slowly breathing right down. We do the heart math breathing, so calming that primal brain down, and then felt sense, just be aware of what's happening in your body without resistance, without reacting. Just let that emotion pass through the body. Because generally, obviously, we're always usually so busy, or we distracting ourselves, or we're self-soothing with, oh, let's get something to eat, so let's have that cake, because it stops us having to feel how we're actually feeling. Or other things that we tend to do, so we're not acknowledging it. So that's the main thing I do. But on an initial assessment with somebody, I will teach them how to go into the body and just try to teach them to get out of their heads and focus on the bodies. And I will either do that as at some point during I do a 2-hour assessment. So I'll either do it just when it feels right, or at some point during it, but more often than not, if I notice a change in expression, or I say to them, tell me if the pain increases or you get a sudden symptom somewhere, or I'll see an emotion or color change or whatever. I'll say, right, just pause. And are you happy to go into emotional awareness now? I'll usually say what brought that up, how are you feeling, but then get them to start focusing on the body. I teach them to, if we're doing it without being in the moment when an emotion comes up, it might be, okay, let's go through this exercise. Then I will either get them doing a body scan, and if there's an emotion there, then if there's a sensation there, I'll allow them to, encourage them to start observing it, but not reacting to it. And I'll explain about neurophysiology and the primal brain, etc. Maybe somatic tracking, as Alan Gordon in our field has been doing, which is just showing the primal brain that this is not dangerous, we're safe, everything's fine. If we're doing it when they haven't got sensations anyway, or symptom anyway, then I will often encourage them to maybe think of something, bring to mind something that they regret or they feel guilt about. Everybody's got something. And then I say, right, how's that? What's happening in your body when that happens? And then we always finish, obviously, with the love, compassion. Okay, bring to mind something.
Finish on a high note.
And what do you notice? And it's quite interesting how many people are not aware of anything, and they're in their heads and they're explaining it. And I know I've got another blog that I did about 2.5 years ago, I think, about emotional awareness. And it shows a recording of somebody the way I work is slightly different now, but it shows a recording of a lady I was working with then with fibromyalgia. And she was quite a few weeks into the 3-month program, and her symptoms were easing, and she was getting out again. She was going cycling, but she had developed 2 days earlier knee pain and shoulder pain. So when we came to the meeting, she had no idea why, but she was saying, I'm fed up with this and get quite cross with it, and I've been trying to do that emotion awareness, it doesn't work. But she was very much somebody who was overanalyzing, a warrior, always in her head thinking, and she'd really struggled to just let go. And I often talk about just surrender to what is. And then so I surrender to the pain so it can attack me. No, that's not the idea. It's just letting go of the resistance towards
the resistance. Yeah, that's a real, I think that's a really important concept that is, it's hard for a lot of people to grasp, isn't it? That your background in manual therapy, we notice all the time if we're, someone coming with back pain or pain in their calves, and as soon as you touch the calves, there's the whole body resists, doesn't it? Resists the working through it and softening. So that, what you can see physically a physical kind of movement, but then there's the more subtle resistance when it comes to something like anger or fear or frustration. And knowing, you know, I'm good friends with a few body psychotherapists who are also yoga teachers, and they talk about this internal gripping. You know, if we have a tendency for internal gripping, in when we're struggling with some kind of emotional challenge. So, you know, that resistance, do people, is that sort of the word you use most often then, let go of resistance, or surrender's another one? Do people sort of grasp that easily, or does it take some time a while for them to?
It varies. And as I said, this lady, this was about 9 or 10 weeks in, and no matter what I said, how I explained it, it was still difficult for her to experientially let go. And that's why I said to her, can I record this, the Zoom call, because we're doing it online, can I record this? And I'll send it to you. And then just watch it and practice this. And I was just really lucky that on that call, that was the aha moment. And luckily she agreed for me to be able to share it as well. And you can see that she starts, as soon as she just lets go, and you can see it going into her head thinking, and then encourage her to, okay, that's it, trying to explain it. Now just settle into your body and just notice what's happening in your body. And when she was able to do that, then suddenly she had this aha moment of, oh, now I know what it's about, and the pain just resolved. And that's when it's fun. But yes, there's a lot of resistance for many people. Some people, it's easier for them, as you know, easier for them to get it, so to speak, to be able to start letting go. And for other people, it's a real challenge, and especially if you have anxiety. I work with a lot of people, obviously, with anxiety and depression, because it comes with chronic pain. But when there's more anxiety, they're more in their heads and analysing, worrying, and therefore it can be harder for them to let go because it feels dangerous.
Yes, yeah. I know. I mean, my personal experience, sometimes the tension is the pattern of holding onto something, or the lack of resistance can be hard to spot and identify if it's been there for so long, or it's a deeply held pattern. Then the pain may be somewhere else in the body, but the holding might be, you know, it might be diaphragm or psoas or something, but the pain is up in the neck or the back or the head or wherever.
And that's what I was so aware of with my patients, that I could see that there were people who had chronic symptoms and people who would or recurring. So I'd treat them for one acute condition, then they'd come back and there'd be something else. And I have to say, I was one of those that had a lot of recurring musculoskeletal problems and other things. But I used to go to a Bowen therapist and craniosacral therapist, and it was very obvious that there was tension in my body, my iliotibial band, even if I wasn't aware of pain there, and in my hamstrings. I never had pain in my hamstrings, but boy, were they my upper thoracic area. So lots of areas were holding that tension that I was unaware of and didn't understand. And it was like looking for what's going on with me, what's going on with my patients, and why so many of them that I'd already realized that the ones that kept coming back or had chronic symptoms, there was a tension within them. And it was difficult to be able to allow them to just let that go when you're just doing a physical approach. So yeah, it's difficult.
It is difficult. It's you know, it's I'm sure there's lots more to be discovered as well, because you know, when the and from you know, I always go back to the kind of want to figure out a mechanism and the biology behind it. But you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the biotensegrity.
Yes. I learned that in my neurostructural integration technique, actually, when I learned that form of body.
Oh yes, yeah. Because the other thing I wonder about with emotional, the effect of emotional patterns on the body. So yeah, we have this tension and the gripping and the resistance, but then there's also collapsing as well.
Yes.
So you know, maybe I'm just going to use the word depression, but some emotional habits can be to collapse in an area. And so there's not enough hydraulic pressure in the body in that case to allow organ systems to function properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not so, and I guess that's where people who look at the body from who do mechanical assessments and watch people in situ walking and so on, they might notice that. But I'm not aware of anyone who, body psychotherapists maybe, but this, the idea of where we might be collapsing as well, and how do we bring more life and bring more energy into the body.
Well,
Have you got
part
any
of that
thoughts on
for
that?
us is, yes, I mean, part of that for us is actually, we would say that anxiety, depression, pain, or whatever is a manifestation of unresolved emotions. So by being able to start mobilizing emotions, starting to acknowledge and express them, and we use interoception work at that sense, but we also use journaling as well, and just ways to allow emotions, unresolved emotions, which might be repressed from the past or avoided in the present because we just keep carrying on and we just ignore them.
Yeah.
But by allowing people, encouraging people to acknowledge and express emotions, the more they're able to do that, the more they're able to feel other emotions as well, and then that then can help build their resilience. And like you say, that whatever I can't remember how you put it now, but that resilience in the body anyway, so it's not collapsing.
Yeah. And that's why I guess why it's so important for the person to find their own language and find you're empowering them to feel their body, how they truly experience it themselves.
Yes.
Otherwise,
and I often use myself as an example. So I do tell people a few things about things that have happened to me. But one thing that really helps them understand this resistance that we have, this automatic going to fear and resistance, is when I had sciatica, when I left the NHS, set up my own business, my pension anymore, I got no monthly salary, my husband's self-employed, and I'm coping. I was fine, very much breathing up the air, but I was fine. And then woke up one morning with sciatica. And I was already on my journey, but not really at that point recognizing it was to do with stress or what's going on in my life, until I went to see this craniosacral therapist who does somato-emotional release. And she's the first person who ever said to me, "So what's going on in your life?" And that was, and then obviously, okay, this is all that's going on. And within 2 or 3 sessions, the sciatica had gone. But I'd had 2 weeks of not being able to put my shoes and socks on. And every time I tried to move, I'd be going like this. I would be rigid, fearful of the pain coming on. And then a couple of years ago, I had the first back pain that I'd had in 12 years or so. And it was when I was on holiday, which is a common time when you're on holiday or going through stress and then you relax. And I thought I'd been dealing with everything fine. And part of it was that my husband works in agriculture, so we can never plan a holiday. We can never,
no.
Are we going? We're not going. We're going, we're not going. To the point that I've been saying, if we're not going, I'm going to Bali on a meditation retreat or something. But in the end, we had a week's notice and we went on holiday. Now, I was dealing with the emotional stuff, the frustration and not knowing whether I had to tell my patients, no, sorry, right, that's it, I'm going away. And it was okay, but it clearly wasn't 100%, I don't think. But what I didn't realize on the airplane was that you can receive texts on the airplane. And I went to my phone to check something, and I'd have a text saying that my mother-in-law with severe dementia in a care home had been taken to A&E.
Oh, no.
And we'd just ordered Bucks Fizz for our 30th wedding anniversary. And so suddenly and I'm teasing him and saying, well, I'm not going home, you can go when we land. And thankfully, my PA was working that day. So I was texting her and saying, could you contact the care home, contact my sister-in-law, etc. And by the time we landed, it was fine. But because we were on a high, because we were going on holiday for the first time in 3 years, because of his work, I was on a high. I wasn't actually being very good at acknowledging how I was feeling. So we just carried on. The first day was great. Second morning, woke up in pain. And I always say to patients that the difference with, first of all, it's the mind body at work. So it doesn't mean that we who work in this field don't get symptoms. It means we don't react with fear, which perpetuates it. So as soon as I woke up and I moved and I got pain, I went, oh, I thought I was dealing with all this. What now? And the difference then was that instead of going, oh my God, I can't do this, I can't move, it was just softening myself, sitting on the edge of the bed, getting ready to get dressed. And actually, when I was bending over to put my shoes on, to just take a slow my breathing right down, be very kind to myself, self-compassionate, allow myself to gradually just bend. And it was fine. Not fine, but it wasn't agony. And then I remember just talking kindly to myself and saying, look, you know what, we'll spend the day just having a quiet day, meditating, lying on the beach. There's a beautiful gazebo. We can go meditate there, and we'll do some journaling, emotional awareness, inner child work, and we'll just have a quiet time. And within 24 to 48 hours, it had resolved. That initial difference from going, oh my God, I'm in pain and be scared, to, okay, what am I not dealing with? And being kind to myself and softening this.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, so much we could unpack in that, and you know, all the different layers of expectations that were on you, and the flying is stressful on the body as well, and you know, the organizing to go away on holiday, and
there's a lot going on. Yes,
a lot going on. But yeah, I really like what you said about just using that as an opportunity to say, actually, just I can slow down for a day and everything will be okay. And and
you actually work on the emotional stuff rather than just, okay, let's have a quiet day. I knew I needed to make sure I had acknowledged, expressed any emotional stuff going on as well.
And it you know, I often see that people who are high functioning, you know, they are strong characters, very able career-wise, or can cope with massive family demands, and you know, they're the ones who battle on. But then that is, you know, maybe they are more susceptible to something like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue or so on. So yeah, it's really, really interesting, isn't it, about how to help people let go and allow themselves to,
because they're too busy trying, and this is one thing, trying to get better, trying to get rid of the pain, and this is a completely different mindset. And when they come to me as a physio initially, and I will say to them, this is not like you going to a doctor or physio to give you something or do something to make you better. I will support and guide you, but this is about you learning what you can do so you become self-empowered. And so this is very different, isn't it? And the more you keep trying to get better, so if you let something go, you're releasing, you're letting go. If you're trying to get better, if you're trying to get rid of the pain, there's so much resistance within that. But it can take time for that. They can consciously understand it, but it's about, you know, unconsciously experiencing it as well.
Absolutely. And you know, that getting rid of, I've done that myself. I've been in a situation, I suffered from a atrial tachycardia, and when it was being investigated, I was, you know, it almost jinxed it for me. I was getting all these episodes all the time, and I went to a mentor of mine who does meditation. She's very clued up and does lots of other therapies as well. And she sort of saying, Ian, you're saying, you know, you want to get rid of this. And I was like, oh yeah, that's true. I am using that term a lot. I'm really trying hard. I'm over trying.
Yes.
So she helped me to ease my target and ease my goal and just make it easier for myself. And you know, that helped massively. But it's, you know, that thing, how to embody it yourself and how to identify what's going on. Every time I was trying, there was, you know, now I can feel when it's like I wouldn't say a pain or a tightening in the chest. It's a very subtle, I'm guessing it's fascia in the chest cavity, maybe around the pericardium, or I can't remember the exact fascial thing, but I can feel something start to close up in my chest, and baroreceptors, you know, around my neck, slightly, you know, activating, or what, I don't know what structures they are.
And who cares?
Who cares? But it's something that I can feel now that I didn't used to be able to sense.
Absolutely.
And then you can soften it and reverse it, and that's the allowing or the surrendering, isn't it, rather than fighting.
Definitely. And that's often what I say to the patient. You know, the more aware you can become of how you're feeling, then the more likely then you will not need that symptom. Because if you deal with the emotions. It's like having a migraine. Often they'll get an aura. So if they actually start doing more self-care when they have the aura, the likelihood is that they could actually prevent the migraine. But if they actually begin to notice the emotion that triggers the aura, then they could actually start. That's when they can really start improving their health. And that took a while for me as well. I mean, I used to get I lived with heartburn for decades. Lived on antacids, and I can remember the exact time and what was going on. And I use this to explain this with my clients. When I had a button pressing moment that then ended up with heartburn, and when I then dealt with the emotions, it just went resolved. And all I did was just sat and did mindfully. All I did was ask myself, so how am I feeling? And no, what's causing this discomfort in my chest? And I remember I'd actually didn't want to journal. I hadn't been able to. This is like I'd done the normal thing for me then years and years ago. Sit in the car working out what's going on here. Why have my buttons been pressed? And I couldn't do anything in the meeting at that time with the awareness I had, and I couldn't work it out. So then I ended up with a heartburn. And then when I got home, that's when I had a bath. I just started stroking my arms as self-soothing, and I just asked the question, what's causing this uncomfortable feeling? And then just probably after 10 minutes, just mindfully relaxing, letting go, suddenly this image of somebody popped into my head, which actually helped me realize what it was, but also the heartburn just went.
Wow.
So that's something that's easier then to help clients understand.
And then when you've noticed that connection and that pattern, the next time you encounter that person or the trigger or whatever, or the situation, then you've got a choice. Then you can use the pause, breathe. What was the other one? Pause, breathe, feel, and
then reassure. Sometimes it's just putting a hand on the heart and going, excuse me, going, I feel you, I hear you, I love you, I'm safe. And that could be it all. But I didn't. This was like 10, 12 years ago. I didn't know that then.
Well, yeah. And I think it's, that's why all the new work that's coming out with Stephen Porges has been studying safety for decades, hasn't he? And the polyvagal theory, but this whole interest in the vagus nerve and really kind of adding credibility to how powerful our autonomic nervous system is in affecting our physiology and the gut brain axis and heart brain axis. And it's really reassuring that all this information is backing up these soothing techniques that have been in different therapies for quite a while.
Yes, and it helps to use that, I think, to explain to our patients as well. When you're triggered, whether that's pain or whether that's fear, and an emotion or something, that actually if you self-soothe, it's actually calming the nervous system down, telling your primal brain you're safe, relaxation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Georgie.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ian, and have a good weekend.
Yeah, you
and
too.
Yes, do keep in touch.
Bye now.
All right, see you then. Bye.